hour, and we have got a full one for you. 3 o'clock was The Taste with Rick Simone with Alfresco Dining. Want to thank him and all the guests for coming into the studio. Want to thank GoLocal regular Bob Whitcomb. Bob, thanks for coming in today.
How are you?
Got to kick off. It has been Supreme Court Palooza.
Sure has, yeah. The union decision, interesting, this have an interesting macroeconomic effects. I have to confess I've always been very suspicious and skeptical basically against public employee unions because it's a natural conflict of interest with the politicians. Having said all that, this is going to weaken the union movement even more than it has been with the decline of private sector unions. What we used to call trade unions. And I think the effect will be to lower wages and reduce benefits for other people too. This is going to lower the floor even more than it already has. So I think the long-term effect on the general economy may be quite negative because of the further loss of purchasing power by low and middle income people.
Well, we saw Rhode Islanders speak out on the issue today. You can read that on GoLocal after about some leaders speaking out. Because, of course, on the more conservative side, they're taking the victory lap. Trump's taking the victory lap.
Well, I saw that, and I think there's something, and I've always been I've been kind of tormented by this because I think in principle I'm very suspicious of public employee unions because, as I just said, the politicians then can use them or have to address their needs sometimes over the public interest. And I think it's been a particular problem in education. Having said all that, you've got the macroeconomic effect, you know, in the general economy, and I think in a troubling. I've got some troubles with that. Again, I think it's going to tend to, by further reducing the power of low and middle income people to bargain for higher wages and better benefits. I think the inflation-adjusted effect on wages would be to lower them even more. Not that they've surged in the last 30 years, and to weaken the what's the right word? The influence of working class people.
Well, we'll see what happens.
It's a tough case.
Moving forward on the labor front, of course, this comes on the heels of the Supreme Court upholding the Trump travel ban.
Right, that didn't surprise me. That was what the third iteration.
I think it was third iteration. 3.0 as it's been dubbed.
I did notice within, well, a couple of things. I'm much more worried about an angry young white male, probably who has attended Trump rallies, who loves guns, blowing me away and killing a lot of people than a terrorist from a Muslim country. I think I think this is a kind of misplaced concern. Also, I noticed that of the and I'm not alone in this, that of the Muslim countries were listed, there were, I think, was it Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey were excluded from the list.
I think they called it a carve-out.
Yeah, there's a carve-out for countries in which the president has business interest, while the countries from which terrorists have actually come, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and I think, what was the other one? Yeah, including the UAE, yeah, were excluded. They're okay because they do business with Trump and his associates. So it was a very peculiar kind of ruling, but I think the Supremes didn't necessarily say they agreed with that ruling. What they said they agreed was that the president had the right to do it.
Exactly.
Which isn't quite the same thing. Chief Justice Roberts made that very clear in a somewhat in a very interesting side commentary. But again, I think this is mostly a misplaced fear. If you look at who's apt to get shot or killed or otherwise attacked by terrorism in the United States, the overwhelming threat is from young white male native-born Americans.
Well, of course, these two decisions are probably even dwarfed today, but not an unexpected move, but coming today on the heels of so much action from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court Justice Kennedy,
who was sort of, they call him a swing vote. He's conservative, but sometimes he'd surprise people. He was basically a Republican conservative, but gay rights, he was quite a proponent of gay rights. He's retiring. As you and I discussed before going on the air, this was pretty much expected.
It was expected.
I'm assuming that Mitch McConnell will railroad through the Senate the candidate, Trump's candidate, Trump's nominee, as quickly as it can.
We'll see. We'll see what happens because there's clearly concern amongst Democrats. There's concerns amongst the pro-choice community.
Right.
We did see Aaron Ruggenberg make a statement this afternoon. He wants the General Assembly to be reconvened to talk about the particular state legislation for a woman's right to choose. Jennifer Lawless, down at American University, basically said that there goes a woman's right to choose. There's an overwhelming sense that this could potentially, obviously, tip the balance.
I think it probably will. I think the interesting political effect. I think all that's bad news, at least temporary bad news for the left, if you want to call it the Democrats left, left of center, and the progressives a little further left, is it will maybe agitate them enough to get them to vote. As you know, in 2016, voter turnout fell, and these people who didn't go to the polls are now complaining about what happened. Voter turnout amongst the Democrats fell because nobody was particularly excited about Hillary. They either didn't like her, or they weren't energized by her. You know, a lot of the Bernie people waited it out.
Well, we did just see what happened in New York yesterday with a big progressive win there. But let's talk, I mean, between Kennedy retiring, the potential for RBG to be gone in short notice as well. I mean, let's talk about the people that the president can potentially put on the court. And if they're young, if they're in their 40s or 50s, he's not just changing the composition of the court, he's changing the composition of the country for a long time.
Yeah, as conservatives, William Howard Taft, people like that did in the early part of the 20th century, you know, these very, in some cases, you really call them reactionary justices, like some of the people that stopped some of the New Deal. They're going to have this for a long, long time. I think it's going to cause a lot of outrage on the other side, but again, the Democrats deserve it because not enough of them bother to vote. The Tea Party crowd and the cultists, the 35% of the population who are fanatical about Trump, they all vote. You know, they vote for their leader. And the other side tends to be much more languid.
Well, do you think, I mean, let's see what happened in New York yesterday, between Governor Raimondo, Matt Brown, between Dan McKee and Aaron Ruggenberg, you know, do you think this is an indicator of what could potentially come in the primaries here in the state?
Well, I don't think quite. My guess is that's still a little exaggerated. I still think kind of the old-fashioned Truman Democrats will succeed. I think the big question is, as we've said time and time, what happens to the general economy? If the economy goes way south, then I think it's likely to start doing that next year, maybe in 2020. Nobody ever knows. The timing of booms and busts is almost always wrong. But we know we're in a credit bubble. The country is operating under a sugar high from these tax cuts. And so when the
tax cut, sugar high.
Sugar high, that's what it is.
Bob Whitcomb coined it here.
Borrowing levels are astronomical. The household debt is through the roof. Corporate debt. They're even borrowing money to buy back stock. To you know why? To boost the price of the stock for the people in the C-suite. And then they'll be out. They'll take their money and run. So
Getting
when
out
all
when
that
the going's
implodes, I don't know when it'll implode. I think probably by 2020.
But as you always say, it's the economy stupid when it comes to voting.
And then you'll have a real progressive thing. You know, if the unemployment rate goes up 10, 15%, then the lefties will have their day.
We'll see what happens. Let's talk a little bit about what GoLocal unveiled this week. You know, as folks have been following, the collapse of the St. Joseph Pension Fund was one issue within the diocese. But GoLocal obtained documents that show the troubling nature of the lay pensions and the school teachers who could potentially be affected. Does the Catholic Church, does the diocese have an issue on its hands?
I think they really do. There are a lot of people, one of whom is you-know-who, my wife.
But full disclosure,
Not that there's a vast quantity of money there, but but she gets a little monthly payment for being an art teacher at various Catholic schools, and that could all go away, I guess. Even though, again, what she's getting paid is very minor, but I guess even that could go.
Well, keeping an eye on that and all things within the diocese and the pensions. And you've got your cheat sheet here of things you want to talk about.
You know, obviously we talked about the Supremes, and the most important thing, she says, probably Justice Kennedy's retirement. The union thing didn't surprise me. The Pawsox thing is fascinating because it's a mystery. We don't really know what the deal is. Maybe you've heard. Is the governor signing this thing?
Well, the last I'd heard from her when I had spoken with her on live was that she was supportive of it. But the real million-dollar question is this what the Pawsox want?
That's right. You know, and also people get all mixed up. The Pawsox don't own the stadium. They have a company, the Pawtucket Red Sox, which is affiliated with the Boston Red Sox. So it's, you know, we get these things all tangled up. We don't know what the deal from Worcester is going to be yet. We know that Charlie Baker has expressed in a rather vague way a willingness to provide some infrastructure support. which means transportation, I assume, exits and, entryways, and things like that. We have no real idea of what their proposal is in Worcester.
Well, we're waiting to see what's next. We do know that it passed at the Assembly. Anything else that you want to...
Let me see. Yeah, it's sort of a crazy thing. It may interest me and two other people. I noticed in my neighborhood there's this beautiful modernist building. It was put up in the 1950s by a famous local architect called Ira Rakitansky, who studied at Harvard under famous architects like Walter Gropius and stuff. And I'm walking by that thing, and I thought, this kind of made me nostalgic. It's kind of beautiful. It's kind of light and airy, and it kind of displays a certain confidence, a certain cultural confidence that the buildings, the modernist and postmodernist, or the postmodernist buildings we see now lack.
So you're waxing nostalgic for
of all things,
the modernist era.
I never thought I would, but now it's looking good.
But what about the brutalist?
The brutalist, I'll never fall in love with that.
Boston City Hall is not going to be high on your list. No.
Absolutely. Oh, one other thing. Do we have one fascinating a business story, sort of healthcare story, with Partners wants to basically self-insure all of its employees. Partners, the gigantic healthcare company up in Boston. They're already in the insurance business. They now want to dump Blue Cross Blue Shield in Massachusetts and have their neighborhood health plan provide all that stuff, which presents all kinds of interesting quandaries, because the main aim is to cut costs, and yet, of course, a lot of these people insured by neighborhood health plan would be going to Partners. Massachusetts General, Women and Brigham and Williams, whatever it's called.
It seems a little bit of a power play, a big power play, if you will. But we've seen this before. Remember when we talked about the attempts privatization, Berkshire Hathaway, and the
well,
groups.
That's kind of the same thing. They're all going after cost. I don't know how the cost thing works with this.
Because they are it.
Well, I suppose they might be trying to get rid of some of the middlemen, like the brokers, insurance brokers, maybe save some money that way, because Partners has famously high cost, famously high prices by the hospitals, the physicians associated with them. So how does this save money?
Well, we got to keep a close eye on this because of the potential implications here in Rhode Island.
That's right.
Bob, I appreciate your taking the time, as always, to come into the studio.
Take 2 obituaries and call me in the morning.
2 obits, call them in the morning. Bob Whitcomb, appreciate it. We'll talk with you soon. Bob Whitcomb, as he does most every week, comes in and breaks down local news and politics. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.